Ladies and gentlemen, you're warmly welcome to this evening's inaugural lecture by Professor Alison James. My name's Joy Carter, I'm Vice-Chancellor of the University, and it's my very huge pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. Thank you for coming and joining us. I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time listening to Alison. A few words about the university from me to start off with, and then a few words about Alison. So at the University of Winchester, we're passionate about providing an outstanding and rigorous learning environment for our students. This is what we get up in the morning for. This is what we're all about. Of course, we underpin this with research, high-quality research, which is equally important. But learning and teaching is right at the heart of what this university is about. And we're driven. We're driven with a desire to see our students flourish and to make a real difference in the world. Pleased to say this has been recognised both nationally and indeed internationally, and we've had many awards for the work we do, including a top 10 place for teaching excellence in the Sunday Times league tables. What makes us special? I like to think it's lots of things, but one of the important things is creativity and innovation in our teaching. And this passion and creativity is particularly evident in tonight's speaker, Professor Alison James. Alison has dedicated her career to building academic excellence through creativity and interactive approaches to pedagogy. She always makes sure there's a high level of staff and student involvement, and look out, because she's told me there's some audience participation this evening. And also, she's characterised, in my experience, by making sure that you have fun when you're learning as well. So I'm sure she'll bring that into her lecture this evening. Alison has a rather long job title, which I'm now going to tell you. She is Learning Director. No, let's get this straight. She's Professor of Learning and Teaching and Director of Academic Quality and Development. You can see that's all quite a mouthful, but it's an important mouthful. Alison ensures that teaching and learning at Winchester University is the best it can be. She makes sure that we draw on best practice from around the world and also from her own unique experience and research. And we're very proud of what we offer here. So now a few words about Alison. So she grew up in southwest London and went on to read French and Italian at the University of Aberystwyth. I won't ask you how you ended up in Aberystwyth, but I'm sure you can tell people later. After a few years working and starting a family, Alison actually followed a friend's advice to get into teaching. And I don't think she's ever looked back. Initially teaching languages, Alison eventually moved into teaching and learning development. And Alison researches as well. She's researched creative and alternative approaches to reflective practice and personal and professional development. And that's important because she feeds back from that research into her daily work. So these interests informed her MA thesis. In her career, she went on to become Associate Dean, Learning and Teaching at the London College of Fashion, and a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She has a fascination with alternative and creative approaches, and this, amongst other things, has led her to experiment with Lego as a research tool and a teaching and learning tool. And I'm very proud to tell you that she became and is an accredited facilitator of Lego Serious Play. I'm going to say that again. She's an accredited facilitator of Lego Serious Play. And she got that in 2013. And if you're wondering what that's all about, you're about to find out. So Alison has built on our strong foundation of academic excellence. She brings huge quantities of energy, enthusiasm, and experience to her role, developing a model of teaching and learning in close partnership with staff and students alike, drawing, as I say, on the power of play and creativity. I'm sure I would have been a much better student if I'd been one of Alison's students, because play and creativity really does engage the learner at every level of education, not just higher education, right from the tinies through to lifelong learning. It's a hugely powerful tool, and I'm really excited that we'll hear so much more about that this evening. I do have to end by mentioning Alison's Play and Creativity Festival, her own personal festival, which she brought to Winchester. She introduced it first last year, and though we've recently had the second one just last month. This builds on a large body of research evidence about play and creativity in learning, and Alison will tell us more about it this evening. So, don't just take it from me, or indeed from Alison. We've got our Chancellor to talk to you about this as well. So our Chancellor, for anyone who doesn't know, is Alan Titchmarsh, an extraordinary, passionate and exciting individual, and quite an academic as well, though not many people know that. And when we told him recently about the Festival of Play and Creativity, he offered to do a short video for us to inspire people to come along. It's only 2 minutes, and I just thought you might like to see it. So let's try this and see if it works. Here he is.
Hello, I'm Alan Titchmarsh, Chancellor of the University of Winchester, and I am encouraging you to come to this, the Play and Creativity Festival 2018. But this is a university. We don't play at university. Oh yes we do, because we know that by play, by involvement, by enjoyment, we learn. And what's more, we remember. I've been involved in the world of communication for, well, I don't tell you how long, but it's a long time. And I've realised that the way to engage people is through giving them a good time, really. And via fun, play, learning, whether it's with balloons or volleyball, sitting down, the gentlest way of playing volleyball. Somehow communication happens. You begin to understand one another, to understand the value of education. Education via play, it's the oldest form of getting across a message and of getting people to remember it, to enjoy it. And as someone who spends their life engaging an audience, I know that the best way to do that is through good humour and enjoyment. So if you think education should actually be really rather serious and there's no time for play and creativity, well, come along, we'll prove you wrong.
That's why he's the superstar he is. He had no briefing for this. He had no notes. He had nothing. We just spent a couple of minutes talking to him about what the festival was, and off he went. So this is why he's the super TV star that he is. And it's lovely to have him here, maybe not in person, but almost in person, endorsing what Alison does. So, Alison, I'm nearly finished. I can see you putting your hat straight, but I haven't quite finished yet. Because what I wanted to say to you is just thank you. A big thank you. It's a joy to have you here. You're a hugely valued and important part of our university community. We're endlessly thankful for the wonderful contribution you make to this institution. For the excellent teaching and learning our students experience with us, so much of that comes from you, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Professor Alison James.
Ooh. That's coming off, and that's where it stops. First of all, I must say, the Vice-Chancellor, thank you so much for those words. It was really, really lovely of you. And I'm incredibly grateful to all of you for joining me here this evening. I'm not ashamed to say that this is a massive deal for me. I'm incredibly proud to be a Professor of Learning and Teaching. And thank you for being here to celebrate with me. Particular thanks to governors for making the time to come, to our guests, to my colleagues, and to my family and friends. Particularly the latter, please try and stay awake. So, We are going to be talking about play and creativity, well, so you'd hope, given the title of the talk. But before I get into it, I'm going to be talking a little bit about play theorists and drawing on the science of play, the pedagogy of play, because I'm hoping that by the end of the next few minutes, I have to say few minutes because the First Deputy Vice-Chancellor wants me to be quick, that you'll have a sense that actually perhaps our conceptions of play are much more narrow than they need to be, and that we do need to revisit maybe where we view the place of play to be in our lives. Now, one of the theorists I'm going to talk about is a man called Johann Huizinga, who wrote a book in 1938, which is a seminal text about the importance of play as a cultural phenomenon. But he had this, one of his positions was that play is ritual and ritual is play. Now, I don't wish to diss the seriousness of the tradition or the kind of history that is imbued in the ceremonial gowns, but you have got to have a sense of humour to be dressed up in things like this, and they are very warm. So let's move on. So I'm going to be talking about science, pedagogy, play, our students outside, staff as learners. But what I want to sort of talk about, first of all, is perhaps a little bit of the journey that we've been on with play. I would like to talk about the rehabilitation of play in a university, but the re bit is wrong because there hasn't been a habilitation. Actually, play is something that we've often lost sight of in the university sector. We understand it in schools, we understand it as part of leisure, as part of our social life, but somehow we lose our nerve when it comes to play as part of advanced learning and research. Not all of us. And certainly one of the things that we'll find as I go through the examples this evening is that sometimes it looks like nobody's doing it, but actually at other times, really, people are doing it, but they're being quite quiet about why they're using play or how they're using play, which raises questions about why are they being quiet? And do they have any doubts that either what they do won't be viewed as credible or that somehow it's not valuable enough? But there is this change in the zeitgeist, and I will touch on it in the course of our talk. So we've seen this effervescence of interest in play in the last 5 years in the university sector. And I've been a part of that, as have key colleagues. I must just say one thing, because the Vice-Chancellor was very generous to talk about the Play and Creativity Festival as my personal festival. I think she said that to wind me up, because I know that people in the room who were my co-conveners of the festival will kill me if I take the credit for that. And it absolutely wasn't, it wasn't my credit. It was the most amazing experience, and it was down to everybody who was involved. So there we are. I was actually going to introduce this little bit with a picture of me at primary school, but you'll be glad to know I lost my bottle and I whipped the picture out at the last minute. I know, shame. This is actually really to show you Juniversity. Juniversity was the brainchild of our First Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and it's the most fantastic initiative to encourage pupils who don't really have university on their radar, perhaps pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, who don't come from families who naturally have a legacy or a history of going to university, to realise that university is for them. And we had our inaugural session last year. It was 2 days. We had 150 year fives come onto campus, and they came to do a Lego workshop with me, 4 hours each day, and we explored what they called their learning journeys to success. And we did use Lego Serious Play. I'll talk about that in a little while. But what they were talking about were their fixed and their growth mindsets. Carol Dweck's work about how we are open to learning, or we're very stifled in how we conceive of our learning. And so what is really interesting is that in the primary sector, and less so, but still a little in the secondary sector, there is this understanding that play for learning is fine. It's part of formative development. It's what you expect of school children. And then somehow it falls off its perch when we get to university. And the one message I want you to take away this evening, and I hope I will succeed, is that actually that is a travesty. And we need to make sure that play is an integral part of our university learning. So I'm going to get the sciencey bit out of the way first, but it is really important, I think, for us to understand that play isn't just kicking a football around the park, not that there's anything wrong with that, or however else we wish to define play, and I will be getting you to define play in a minute. You'll be delighted to know. So let's look at this lady here, Marion Diamond. She's a really interesting figure who unfortunately died last year, but she was one of the founders of neuroscience. And her big kind of contribution to the field was looking at brain enrichment. She actually started looking at how the brain changes through enrichment activity, and she started with part of the brain of Einstein. So she had a pretty good starting point, really, for that sort of investigation. But what she went on to do also was to do research with rats. And she found that rats which were in a very controlled environment with no stimuli, no kinds of distractions or games or whatever, had very small brains. Their brain capacity was limited in some way. Whereas the rats who had companions, who had toys, who had games, their brains were larger and they were more engaged in their activities, their surroundings, and so forth. So she was already onto something with her rat research. That's something that also a farmer called Rosamund Young has written about. Now, she's somebody who has farmed for 40 years in the Cotswolds, and she has been radical because she refuses to use the sorts of methods where animals are corralled, where they don't have socialization, games, the ability to choose which field they're going to wander in and out of, and a much more kind of flexible lifestyle. And she said over generations, you can see the brain size grow by 30%. In the bovine population. And she said also through that kind of play and socialization, you actually see the bovine head change shape, so wider foreheads and more alert, more intelligent behaviors. So there's another kind of example from the animal kingdom. Coming back to humans, we have a lot in common with the animal kingdom, and Stuart Brown, who's a psychologist, has worked with cases of deviancy. He's done 6,000 or more case studies, and he has noted how in juveniles who suffer from play deprivation, there is a greater incidence or a likelihood of antisocial behaviour, deviancy in some form. And what he talks about, which is a really important concept for us to think about for ourselves in general, but also learning at university, is this idea of neoteny. And he says humans are neotenous. And by that he means that we bring with us juvenile characteristics into adulthood. And that's how we sustain curiosity in things. It's how we keep open to change. And it's how our brains don't then become rigid in adulthood, but they remain plastic. So this notion that we develop until a certain age and then it's sort of downhill all the way is actually not correct. So it's really important for us to remember this notion of plasticity as well. He and Diamond and others have also written about the correlation between play and brain size, which I've also mentioned with Rosamund Young. So the more active, the more playful, the more engaged, the larger your brain. So I had a cunning plan, as Baldrick would say, which of course went completely out of the window. I said to the ladies when we were getting organised, don't let anybody sit in the back rows. They all need to be in the front 7. And that obviously didn't work at all. But it does mean that for part of what we're going to do next, some of you who are in the back rows are either going to feel really relieved or a bit deprived. And I can't possibly prejudge which it's going to be. But first of all, let's think about play definitions. Does anybody want to give me an example of what you think play means?
Doing something for fun.
Doing something for fun. Lovely. Have we got any others? Practice. Any others?
Something that's not work.
Something that's not work.
Exploratory behavior.
Exploratory behaviour.
Use of imagination.
Use of the imagination. Something that engages you. Yes. Any other types? What sort of types of play have you engaged with, have you encountered, do you do anywhere, ever? Ooh, that was simultaneous listening going on. I heard games. Shout out again. Social. Sport. Puzzles. Role play. Board games. Yes, dancing, absolutely. And we did a class, just to quickly digress, we did a class last year, which was leadership through tango. And we had to learn, seriously, didn't we, Joy? We did. We all learnt tango, we learnt about leadership. I can't begin to tell you the parallels are unreal, but that's for another day, that's a different talk. Sorry, it's not this one. So, what I also want to ask you are there any types of play you don't like? Role play. Absolutely. I can think of one person in this room, and I am looking at her now, who actually, I did sort of weigh up. I thought, will I make them do things? I thought, Anne's going to kill me if I ask them to do things. Then I thought, well, it's worth it, so I'm going to. Now, what you will have noticed, some of you, sorry if you're in the back rows, but you can always run on down and have a look if you're interested. There are objects littered on the floor. Can you see the objects that are on the floor? Okay. Look, the good news is if the next 20 minutes gets boring, you've got something to distract yourself. But the other thing is, raise your hand if you chose the seat because of the object. Some of you. Raise your hand if you sat as far away from the objects as you possibly could. Or moved it. That's what you do in a leadership role. You show initiative. Absolutely. Did anybody walk in and think, oh, that's clearly for somebody else, not for me? And did anybody walk in and think, what on earth is that doing there? Somebody emptied their handbag on the floor. Okay. Whether or not you're near an object, grab that object and just speak to the person next to you. And for those of you who are, collegially minded, would you please wave your object to the people in the back so they know what they're missing? Nice and visible. So people in the back, can you see the objects? I'm sorry you can't actually hold an object in your hand, but life's not fair. So what I would like you to do then is just turn to the person next to you and either tell them what's on your mind from having picked up this object, whatever that may be. And for those of you in the cheap seats, if you've actually seen an object and it's just caught your eye for some reason, then just talk to the person next to you and say what came into your head when you saw that object.
Is this an object?
Oh, and sorry. Quick instruction from the senior management team. Yes, the envelope is an object, but leave the envelope out because we're coming to that later. So anything that's not the object. You've got the envelope. Okay. I was actually just going to go off and get a sandwich because you seem to be having quite a nice chat, but I know I'm against the clock, so I thought I'd better stay and earn my crust. So if you were in a class of mine, then I would start to ask you what sort of reactions you were having to that object, whether or not there were any associations that sprung into your mind. Maybe they were completely irrelevant. Maybe it triggered a memory. Maybe it made you think something about learning or whatever. But let's just actually turn to the play theorists and think about definitions and types of perceptions of play. So this is Stuart Brown again. It's fun, no particular purpose. Somebody like Huizinga would say that play really should be entirely voluntary. Brian Sutton Smith talks about, he tried to do a typology of play. He said it's practically impossible. There are so many different forms of play, which is quite nice, actually, for those of us who are very selective about the kinds of play that we like and the kinds of play that we don't like. Huizinga, again, sees play as this cultural phenomenon, as I said, and he said all play means something, even if what it means isn't necessarily associated with the play that you're enacting. So that could be that the things that you're talking about are nothing to do with the object that you have in your hand. Oh, I've just thought about it. Somebody say to me wouldn't be when I've got to the end of this slide, would you? Now, Pat Kane. Anybody remember Pat Kane from Hue and Cry, singing duo in the 1980s? I know some of you remember the 1980s, so don't leave me hanging. he says that actually play isn't a matter of idleness or diversion. It's about taking reality lightly. And if you think about the gallows humour of medics, if you think about soldiers' humour at the front line, if you think about office banter, if you think about the ways that we navigate the day-to-day through joking, through play, through whatever it is, that is part of our daily experience. And Pat Kane's particularly interesting because he wrote a book called The Play Ethic. And he has a big social manifesto, which is that society somehow, or certainly Western society, is organised around the work ethic. But he said, what if we completely reconfigured what is important in our life and we actually operated to a play ethic? And by that, he doesn't mean feet on the table doing nothing all day long, but it's a complete reconfiguration of our values. It's the most amazing book, and I urge you to read it. And I'm not going to traduce him by trying to sort of squish it into a few words. Bob Fagan is an animal behaviourist, and he, like Sutton Smith, also agrees that there are too many types of play to name them all. And this guy, Stephen Nachmanovich, is a musician, and he wrote the most beautiful book also called Free Play. And it's about how he sees play enacted out in his world of music. And what I particularly like about Nachmanovich is he says, I never define myself as a musician. I'm not in the music industry or the music business. I'm in the surrender business. And he talks about what it means to give himself over to music. So music takes him where he needs to go, through improvisation, through exploration. And that's really important because he's all about free play. That's what his book's about. And of all the forms of play that we're most nervous of in a university, it's free play. We are comfortable with some forms of play that clearly are measurable, they have rules and they have outcomes, and it's clearly got a point to it, and it's going to clearly take us somewhere predefined. But we're much more wary of the big open space with nothing in it, in case, in these days, when we have quite an instrumental, quite a regulated environment, it will look like we're wasting money, or we're not giving value for money, or we're not maximising opportunities. But actually, sometimes that space, that freedom, is exactly what we need for that newness to come back into our minds and our lives. Okay, wooden bee. Who's got the wooden bee? Somebody's definitely got the wooden bee. Oh, you've got the wooden bee. Would you like to hold up the wooden bee, Liz? Okay. So what did you think when you found yourself sitting next to the wooden bee? Or did you choose it?
Well, I thought, biodiversity, all flowers, all lovely. But Paul next door was like, is that the end of a curtain rail? I was sort of going somewhere else.
End of a curtain rail. That's a work of art.
It looks like, the curtain rail with some wire coat hangers. We thought it was clever.
It does. I mean, it holds up the wooden bee. What else does it look like? Yeah. Can I just say So Liz does. What's your job title, Liz? Environment officer. It's totally spooky that she sat next to a big wooden bee, or even that I brought a big wooden bee this evening. But the question perhaps is in your head is, why on earth did I bring a big wooden bee? Am I playing with you, or am I giving a lecture? We've got fuzzy boundaries here. So we can already see that there's a scientific premise to play. We can see there are different types of play. We probably have our play preferences. There are bits of play that we won't go near with a barge pole, and there are the ones that we tolerate or we get fired up by. We also find when you mention play, people say funny things. So they will either say, oh, but my job's to educate, not to entertain, like the two are mutually exclusive. And other things as well. So what is play for? Here we are, back to our play theorists. I've already talked about Huizinga and this notion of play as a cultural phenomenon, and being pre-cultural even, because we didn't have to teach animals how to play. They knew how to do it before we came along. Brown I've talked about in terms of deviancy. Sutton Smith is good because quite often if you mention play, it sounds like you're being all rainbows and unicorns and it's all about the sort of happy altruistic stuff. Well, people do get happy, but actually play sometimes is tough, it's challenging, it's not necessarily enjoyable. When I trained as a Lego Serious Play facilitator, nobody believed me when I came home and I said I was tired. Actually, when you are exploring, and they still don't believe me now, when you're exploring tough concepts, even if you're using a play medium, that's not necessarily pleasant. It's making your brain work and it's throwing up the norms and your assumptions into the air, but it's not necessarily easy. Nachmanovich, again, this lovely notion of the power of free play sloshing against the power of limits. And that's a marriage that we have to kind of navigate all the time in higher education, is when can we let go and leave students to do the sloshing, and when do we have to kind of provide that structure? And what they want and what we want don't always coincide. Now, Plato said that you can learn more about somebody in 1 hour of conversation, 1 hour of play, than in a year of conversation. And that's a very important quote, and lots of people use it when they're talking about play. What they talk about less is actually, Plato wasn't his real name. It's something like Aristocles or whatever. I'm not a philosopher, and I got it off Wikipedia or something, so I can't sort of pretend I'm being clever. But what I thought was really interesting was that, if this is true, is that one of his teachers named him Plato because of his wide forehead. Now, this takes me back to Rosamund Young's cows, because they had wide foreheads and they had really rich brains and they were really intelligent. So you can see there's a kind of correlation going on there. So, thinking about how we enhance university learning through play. What is it that we get in university learning that we can't get through some of our traditional tried and tested, or even tried and tested, I think tried and tested is probably a Freudian slip, modes of engagement or delivery? Well, you can get a whole heap of things. You can get multi-sensory experiences, you can get novel interpretations, you can get different perspectives, you've got the visual, you've got activity, you've got hands-on learning, you've got a whole heap of stuff going on there. So I did train, and yet don't laugh, a Lego Serious Play Facilitator is a thing. I've got a certificate. And it was on the strength of that actually I've spent quite a lot of the last 10 years either creating courses or modules using Lego for a whole range of different disciplines, or I've done staff development, or I've done workshops. I wrote a guide for the Higher Education Academy. It's in my book with Stephen Brookfield, and a whole heap of things. And Lego Serious Play is a fascinating methodology because it gives you a systematic set of applications to start exploring complex topics by building models three-dimensionally using Lego bricks. Not the kind of recognizable ones that you might have built when you were a kid, where, you know, a train was a train, dog was a dog, house was a house, but you might be building thoughts, feelings, relationships, concepts, dilemmas, aims, strategies, whatever. You start typically with a single model, and then you would share models, you discuss your models, people can question you on your models, but actually what they mean is what you invest that model with. It's not somebody sort of psychoanalyzing you and trying to work out what you meant from the model. And then they can get more and more elaborate because you start building connections between your models and those of other people. And you start mapping out a landscape around your issue. You might see the weak spots, the strong spots. You might start sort of playing out what-if scenarios, thinking, well, you know, what could we do with this, that, and the other? And just to give a few examples, I've used the methodology to look at evaluation, to look at sustainability, to look at how we motivate learning and teaching, looking at the characteristics of successful Erasmus partnerships, with the children at university, looking at their learning journeys to success, how they learn, what their obstacles are, looking at stuckness in learning, getting people unstuck, and 1,000 other things besides. Bottom line, all you need is a complex topic to which, or a question to which there's no straightforward answer, and you can explore it through such a methodology. Why would you do that? Well, you do that because however wary you are, however not sure you are, you find that you very quickly get invested, that you are surprised by what you and other people build, but you're even more surprised by what you think and say and deduce as part of those builds. You can have an idea of the applications you will do with a group. You have absolutely no idea what they're going to build and no idea what they're going to say. So in a way, it's high risk and it's dangerous, but in another way, it's incredibly rewarding because you all come away having learned. So just very quickly, I talked about kind of the last 5 years of being this kind of play trajectory. Just taking you back to 2012. So Stephen and I had written the book in 2012. It came out in 2014. And when we wrote the book, we went to our publishers and I said, I'd like to call it Creativity, Imagination and Play. And our lovely publisher said, no, you can't call it that. You can't have play in the title because nobody academic will buy it. And actually, it was probably wise advice. So we didn't put play in the title. And that was all good. But then I kept thinking, well, that's a bit wimpy because it's really important. And how are you going to get people to realise it's important unless you put it in the title? And so in 2015, Christina Rancy, Norman Jackson and I brought out this double issue of Creative Academic. So Creative Academic is a very non-traditional online journal, Creative Commons. People in the room have contributed to it. And it was really our first invitation thinking, well, are people using play out there? We want to test the water. And if they're using play, what's it like and where is it? We also thought, well, if we're lucky, we'll get 5 or 6 offers. We could all knock out a couple, and then we've got an issue. Hurrah. In fact, what happened was we ended up with 37 contributions. And they came from Norway, they came from Canada, they came from Italy, they came from all over the place. And we had people talking about their Friday afternoon experiments when their only kind of parameter was, what happens if I do this? We had somebody who was exploring assessment using animated vegetables. We had somebody else who was creating games for geography field trips. We had all these mad stories coming through of how people were using play. And we suddenly realized that people are playing, but they're keeping it on the down low. Why is this? We need to get more of this. And that was when Chrissy and I decided that we wanted to do this book, and this is the one that we're just finishing now, and it will come out at Christmas. So for that one, we had 37. With this one, we've got 63 contributors. Again, they are international, they are European, they've come from all over the place. And we've thrown the net wide. Now, this time, we've got a publisher who did bite the play bullet, as it were, and said, all right then, yes, but we really need to be sure that this is going to have a market. Are people really doing this? Are they really interested? We said yes. And we came up with lots of really lovely examples from the creative arts and humanities. And they said sort of nervously, well, that's all right, but have you got a psychologist? And I said, yeah, we've got a psychologist. Well, no, I think you need scientists. Well, I've got 2 chemists. All right. Have you got an engineer? Yep, got an engineer. He said, mathematicians got 2. And at that point, I think they said, oh, all right then, have the book. So we won through. So just really to pull out some of the examples of play that we're going to be talking about in this book. So one of the great joys, I went to talk about play and creativity in the States 18 months ago and met a fantastic guy who's a director of a Centre for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at the University of Maryland. And he's a behavioural psychologist, and we're having a very serious conversation about marvellous ways to do learning and teaching for psychology and what it felt like to run the centre. And then we were just chatting towards the end, and it had been a bit of a stilted conversation. And I said, what did you do before you were a psychologist? He said, oh, I was a dolphin trainer. And suddenly, the whole conversation caught fire. I thought, this was fabulous. And then, of course, he told me what he hadn't told me in our formal conversation, was that he had taken techniques from dolphin training and is using them with his behavioural psychology students. And I have to say, members of my department were incredibly game when I came to the university, because one of the techniques that he did was an activity where he would get the class to be the trainers and one student to be the dolphin. And they would decide in advance what behaviour they wanted to produce in the dolphin, but the only word that they could use to encourage the dolphin, no instructions, no nothing, would be the word good. And so the dolphin would have to kind of move around trying to work out what the behaviour was that he or she had to replicate. And it's an amazing way of bonding with new colleagues, I tell you. They were so trusting. And so there are board games. Yeah, board games to teach history or ward management in nursing, the fantastic name Wardopoly. I don't think there's any sort of copyright issue there. Or for wildlife conservation, zoology, outdoor learning, raft building, pattern, magic. The chemistry students who are at the University of Bristol, who are doing a huge amount, these are postgrads, and they're doing a huge amount of outreach, trying to get school children and sixth formers interested in chemistry. And they've got things like make your own slime, or something called a whoosh bottle, which as far as I can see is just an act of arson, because you get a large canister and you put in methanol and then you light something and it goes whoosh. Sounds fun to me. And then there is other things, juggling for functional biology, using Lego to explore space in museum curation, creating cabinets of curiosities, or these Wunderkammer, these strange rooms that students can go in and explore. Cultural shoebox in dental education, Joe Giddon. I put that one in, but I didn't know you were coming. Joe is a dentist. And it's perfect. So, and I thought, that's bonkers. What are you using a cultural shoebox in dental education for? But they are. So it is about trying to stimulate, to surprise, to bring in the unusual, to create places and moments of wonder. And that is, I think, theatre, simulation, medical students, and all sorts. So these are just a few of the examples which show me that actually we are playing way more than we give ourselves credit for. And what I'm hoping is that through talks like this, through books like ours, through the other kinds of activities that we're engaging in, we are getting the message out that it is absolutely okay to play. And not only that, it is really important that we do for the learning of our students, but actually for our sense of community. Okay, those of you who have an envelope, the envelope which was not an object 15 minutes ago, but now it can be. Have you got an envelope that says, "This is for you"? Raise your envelope if it says, "This is for you." Have you opened it? What's in it?
Lots of thinking.
Lots of thinking, air. Anybody else have a "This is for you" envelope? You're just not telling, are you? I'm not doing that one. What about a "This is not for you" envelope? Liz, what's in your "This is not for you" envelope?
Space.
Space. Thank you. And that's exactly what it is. So whether you had the one that said "This is for you" or you had the one that said "This isn't for you," it boils down to that sense of permission to play and whether or not we allow spaces in which to play. And whether we say, actually, that notion of free play is okay, you're allowed to do it, or we say, well, actually, you know, that's really not quite right, so you can't have it. But whatever your envelope said, that space is incredibly important. And what I want to share with you is 3 different examples of different kinds of space, because to me, when we go into spaces that are not our usual spaces, even if we're still doing our normal job in them, we view our jobs and activities differently, we view others differently, and we automatically stimulate our minds to look at the issues that we're facing in different ways. Back to Stephen Nachmanovich again. If you're making a Christmas book list, he's another really good one, incidentally. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier about boundaries. Where does the play of imagination come from? When are sounds music? When are patterns and colours art? When are words literature? When is instruction teaching? Now, if we had hours, don't worry, Liz, we haven't, we would explore what these things mean. But actually what they say to me is they say magic, alchemy. Teaching is not just training. We don't learn robotic movements to get information from us into our students. There's some kind of something that happens when people come together to learn, especially if we are equally motivated, curious, excited by each other's perspectives on what we're looking at. So 3 examples coming up. So this, does anybody know where this is? My family can't answer this question. It's Alcatraz, San Francisco. Anybody know where I was when I took this photo? I want specifics. No, close, no, not the windiest road. Not on the Golden Gate Bridge, and Tower is close. In fact, where I am, it's the 24th floor of the Fairmont Hotel. It's the Crown Room, which is normally used for weddings. But I'd gone over, I'd been invited to go and speak at a conference on play, and it was co-hosted by Stanford University and by an organisation called Learning and the Brain, and they have these annual huge conferences in America. And I was very nervous. I was very nervous because it was 8:15 on a Saturday morning. And you know when you think, I'm up 24 floors, I'm going to be on my own. How am I going to go back to my university and explain to them that I took all my kit out there, but actually nobody turned up? And what was so lovely was that 150 people turned up to play. So already that said to me that there is an openness and a willingness to actually find out about play and explore play and think about play in our contexts. And some of the people who were there were from non-university settings. And one person in particular, I just wanted to share her experience because she was an assistant principal at a school called Paideia. And Paideia is a private school. But what I felt was so incredibly interesting about them was they are entirely open to play, creativity, community. The school is run by this kind of triad of parents, teachers, and pupils. But the really interesting thing about Paideia, they have forest lessons, they do all sorts of wonderful outdoorsy things together. But to me, the most wonderful thing is they do not assess their students until they are 14 years old. We do not have the bottle to do that in the UK. Now that is hardcore. So there we were, that's one space. And so there we were in this strange space, which normally is for wedding receptions, playing with Lego, with items in a bag, with words, with each other. This, a couple of colleagues in the room will also recognise, that's the sort of ceiling I would like for my classroom every day. And this is Forest School. We were at, we were on the Goodwood estate. The Forest School is actually run by Chichester University. A bunch of us had gone for a meeting about accreditation and recognition in HE learning. So we brought the formal business with us. It's just this time we were in wellies, we were in parkas, we sat on logs, we did activities outside. And it was the most wonderful, I said expiring, but that's a Freudian slip too, inspiring experience, just being somewhere that wasn't the norm. And it was such a joy. And joy is a fundamental, important part of play. And that is what helps us learn. And so we did some fantastic stuff. We boiled our own water over a fire, and we made coffee in storm kettles, and we cooked stuff. That's a calendar cooking popcorn. I was incredibly excited by that. And over here, not to put too fine a point on it, we gathered gall acorns and we crushed them up with some kind of wonderful magical stuff, and we cooked it all up on the fire, and we made gall acorn ink, which Shakespeare used, and we then wrote things, messages to ourselves using quill pens sitting in the forest. We did do business, by the way, so we did a bit of forest school, and then we did an item on our agenda, and then we went back to forest school. I have to say forest school was way more fun. But we left that day on such a high, and I thought, that is the high I want our pupils, our students, our colleagues, people in adult education to walk away with when they have had a learning experience. And so here we are at the Play and Creativity Festival. This was our student-designed logo this year. And it was fantastic to actually be able to get students really involved in our second festival and to have a competition with a really wonderful student who was so incredibly excited about having her logo actually used on T-shirts, on banners, and so on and so forth. And that's something that she can take away and put in her digital media professional portfolio. So these were the reasons. So Play and Creativity Festival Year 1 was a massive gamble, and we're indebted to the senior management team for actually giving us the backing and the belief to do it. It was a project to enrich the life of the university community in some way. We had no idea how it was going to turn out, but this was why we wanted to do it. We felt we were a creative and playful community, but we were hiding our lights under bushels. We wanted to cheer ourselves up. Sometimes the higher education sector at the moment can feel really under siege. There's so much stuff going on, and if you're not in HE, I won't bore you with it now. But sometimes it can feel like the horizon is a little dark and challenging. So we thought, we need to get together. We need to liven ourselves up. But we also wanted to boost each other's curiosity by what we did. We wanted to show that this is about innovation in teaching, and it's a way of enhancing learning. We wanted to intrigue and challenge, and we wanted all to be together. Now, so basically, all we did was we said, we're going to have this festival. This is what it's going to be about. Whatever sort of play you want to do, wherever you want to do it, whatever your subject, whether you're a professional service, whether you're academics, you tell us. And so actually, that's exactly what happened. Colleagues told us. We had 18th century hand gestures. We had blindfold sensory drawing. We had no-sew bunting. We had maggot racing from forensics. We had creative writing workshops. We had so many things going on. In the first year, we had 64 timetabled sessions, but we had other stuff going on in departments that weren't even on our radar. Over the 2 years, we've had several hundred participants, and this year we had over 1,000 people, again from places like Vietnam, Korea, Italy, and all sorts, who came and visited our festival blog, even though they couldn't attend in person. And these were just some pictures from it. So we've got painting, we've got drawing on plates on our heads, as you do. This is the sensory drawing. This actually is our collaborative art, where actually in the course of 4 days, we put blank canvases up in our play tent, and I'll mention the play tent in a second. And through that time, people came in and they just added something to the painting. And those 3 paintings were framed around our university values: individuals matter, spirituality, and compassion. And by the end, we had these 3 collaborative artworks, which I was so excited by, because everybody from any kind of part of the university came and painted on that. The porters painted on it, the vice-chancellor painted on it, academics painted on it, administrators. We all put something. We played musical chairs without chairs. We made origami and floated it on water. We sang, we had dance and movement classes. We did so many things. And time and again, people said, I've got so many ideas for my teaching now. What was really interesting was one of our history teachers who shared some amazing things that she did about teaching history through dress-up, role play, classroom takeovers, whatever. She didn't realise she was being creative. She said, oh, I was just desperate. And so here we are, again, playing Lego in the play tent, and I learned some really valuable lessons in the play tent. So we wanted to have a tent. We wanted a physical space where we would lay on activities, or people could do their activities, as a central hub. And we wanted that kind of village fete, festival-y kind of vibe. So we wanted it to be playful. We had huge paper pom-poms. We had flashing lights. We had this, that, and the other. We had all these stations around the room with different play activities. But what we learned, because actually the weather was truly diabolical the week that we did this, so our lovely sort of outdoorsy vibe didn't work for the first 2 days, was that actually what you could do is just create the space, but not tell people the sorts of things you could do with them or for them, but just say, here it is, what do you want to do in it? And actually that was infinitely richer. People moved their classes in. And so next year, we're tempted to create a play tent or a play space again, but say to people, it's going to be there, what do you want to do in it? And it was just lovely. You know, we had people down there making the space their own. And it's funny how you can set something up and it's a bit like having a party. It's very stale and sanitized when it's all new. But by the end, it's got a feeling to it and a mood and a history that's so incredibly important. And we made that together. And you can't buy it. You know, it's part of the magic of a community. So very quickly, some feedback from that festival, and then I'll draw together my concluding thoughts. This was somebody from professional services in year 1 who said, I now see the reasoning, because some people did think we were bonkers. Play is accepted as something that's only done as or with a child. It seems as though as people age, they forget that play is a valuable learning tool. I've had conversations with people I never speak to on subjects I never talk about. That has got to be great CPD. And Alan, we've already heard him, but I just wanted to reiterate this quote from him about understanding the value of education, of getting a message across, getting people to remember it and enjoy it. We should be enjoying our learning. You know, people who say learning's serious, and if it's not difficult and challenging and it's not making them miserable, then it's not value for money. That's rubbish. Again, a colleague said, using playful approaches has boosted engagement, it's boosted attendance. Students have done better in exam performance. Who knew? They're dressing up and doing stuff, but somehow that translates into their exams because it's more memorable, because they're retaining it. And other people have talked about the democratic effect of play. Play is a leveler because you are all in it together. And it's also blending the informal and the formal. And it is this possibility for collaborative learning. So what next? Well, there's lots going on. We're waiting to hear on 2 really big and exciting projects, which I would just be completely made up if they come to fruition. One will be a massive 3-year research project with 3 other UK universities looking at something called higher play, creating our own typologies of playful learning. That is currently with and waiting the final decision on a major funding body. I really, really hope it happens. But if it doesn't, we're just going to try again somewhere else because it isn't too important not to do. We've also put in for an OECD initiative, which is actually looking at teaching and assessing creativity, but using a very broad church of methods. And to me, that's the ideal opportunity for us to draw in some of the sort of wackier, more out there things that we do. So in addition to the book that Chrissy and I are co-editing, we've also got 2 Lego publications coming up. And there will be a 3rd Play and Creativity Festival. And increasingly, we are being invited to go to all sorts of places to talk about play and creativity. But what I would like to do is just to conclude, to say to you, my reminder, which is play is important, it's valuable. I've given you the science for it, but actually, never mind the science, feel the joy, feel the connection. That is why play matters. I would like also to read you, if I can find it, and I can't, so actually talk among yourselves while I find the quote. Because I promised myself I wouldn't use slides, I just dumped them down in a pile, which was of course fatal, because then the one that you want is not where you want it. But it's a quote that I came across, which is why I need to read it off my sheet, and here you are. So this again, it's Brian Sutton Smith, and he's talking about a state of play motivation. And he says, "There is often more commitment and belief in play activity than in most other forms of human behaviour. Perhaps this applies to all of us to some extent, and play is for us the action in which we truly live. One of the biases of an information-oriented age is the tendency to neglect the fact that throughout history, the adaptive advantage has often gone to those who ventured upon their possibility with cries of exultant commitment. What is adaptive about play, therefore, may be not only the skills that are part of it, but also the willful belief in acting out one's own capacity for the future. The opposite of play in these terms is not a present reality or work. It is vacillation, or worse, it is depression. And I just have one question for you, which is, where might you play to learn next? Thank you very much.
I'm Liz Stewart, I'm the first Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and I'm Alison's boss. And it's my pleasure on behalf of all of us this evening to offer a vote of thanks. There is, I think, in Exeter Cathedral, I think it is, a tomb to a bishop. And on this tomb is the inscription, "He was completely without enthusiasm." These are not words that could ever be applied to Alison James. She has blown into this university on a wave, if I'm mixing my metaphors, of enthusiasm with her outrageous footwear, and has transformed us. She's made us look at how we engage in our core business of learning and teaching, and what we are trying to do. And that's no mean feat. And she has also done what she's done this evening, which is to bring together staff, academic staff and students, academic staff and professional services staff, people from across the university, in playful activities. And again, that's no mean feat. And in an age where higher education is becoming increasingly instrumentalist, she's made us think about what we are trying to do and encouraged us to be playful. So on behalf of all of us here this evening, Alison, thank you so much for making us think so seriously about play.